Whakalofa lava, Nisa Pulivinaka, Kamna Māori, whakalofa lahi atu, kia orana, malo lelei, and warm Pacific greetings. My name is St Andrew Matautia, and I'm in my 5th year of my Masters at Victoria University. So today I just wanted to talk a little bit about my experience through design education in my undergrad as a Pasifika student, and how that has helped inform what I have chosen to look into for my master's research. But before I go any further, I am by no means an expert or claim to know much about design or design education. I'm just here to share my experience and a little of what I have researched. And these are not by any means proven to work, they are just ideas that I think may have, add value to what's already there. Okay, so as a design student of Pasifika heritage, my experience through Victoria University School of Design has been nothing short of a miracle. Why a miracle, you might ask? Because the statistics tells us that as a Pasifika student, I was more likely to fail than non-Pasifika students. And as much as the government has tried to help out in this area, there has been no real significant change. But like everyone else, I did face my fair share of challenges and still do to this point. And whilst I was fortunate to make it through the system in my undergrad, some of my fellow Pasifika students, however, did not make it through first year, and as the years went by, the numbers dwindled. Through my undergrad, I struggled to get good grades in the beginning of second year, and was just passing on some occasions, and it wasn't until one of my lecturers noticed the struggle halfway through second year and suggested, why don't I incorporate a little of my own culture into my design thinking, which was foreign to me at the time because being in an institute that didn't really promote any sort of indigenous knowledge. So then it became a process of what I can only describe as decolonizing my mind and re-establishing that connection with my cultural heritage. Through my undergraduate, I struggled, from here on in, my education experience changed and I began to flourish and my marks got better and was finally able to find a platform from which I was able to draw inspiration from. That was familiar to me, and from there things just started to have a rhythm, which has eventually turned into a thesis for me. And so throughout all this, I have always wondered why Pasifika was always overrepresented on this lower end of the spectrum within design education. Was there some sort of underlying issue that caused these particular students to fail that was not in the literature mentioned in the literature that I've read? Or was it because of some hidden issues that we are not yet aware of? Just as a side note, for those that may not know, Pasifika are not only overrepresented in the design education in this lower end of the spectrum, but they are overrepresented in the throughout education in all, so tertiary, primary and secondary. In Samoa, we have a saying that says, "O le ala I le pule, o le tautua," which translates to, "the path to leadership is through service," which part of me doing my thesis is about how can I give back to my culture through my education. And once again, I draw knowledge from my culture in a concept heavily practiced in Samoa, which is reciprocity. And so this looks at a two-way relationship that looks into the act of giving and receiving, which I'll go into a little more later on. But the hope is that this thesis will enable more Pasifika to succeed in design education, and importantly for me, validate why I stayed. And so I began with looking into the first year cohort at design school, more specifically trying to target the Pasifika students. And current statistics from this in 2014 and 2015, Victoria University School of Design identified 13% of those enrolled as Māori and Pasifika students. In relation to those included in this demographic, research illustrates rather disparagingly that these students are most likely to fail or not complete their studies. Levine and Young argue this unsatisfactory outcome is due to the current mode of education failing to relate to the diversity of cultures evident in the cohort. And so I wanted to find ways in which and how we can better aid the Pasifika demographic of students to better succeed with the use of cultural strategies, with the aim of identifying strategies that will enable a successful bridging between current paradigms in design education and Indigenous methods for the sharing of knowledge. This research will begin to investigate the specific learning challenges Pasifika students face within the current predominantly Eurocentric mode of design education. Consequently, I will talk about two Pasifika concepts that I'm currently looking into for my thesis. So the first concept is what my thesis sort of revolves around. And this looks at the theory of time and space and how we can connect the past, present and future. And this theory or concept is not only used throughout the Pacific, not only as a way of life, but more recently as an academic research tool used by Pacific peoples to solve Pacific issues surrounding the Pacific. In Samoan, it's known as Te Ulewa. In Tongan, it's Taha. When I think about these connections, I think of the past as Indigenous knowledge and practices, and how these can be as simple as incorporating things such as learning about Samoan traditional tattooing and the process that involves or that people go through. Pasifika is filled with the wealth of Indigenous knowledge and practices that we are yet to fully comprehend in a modern context, as I'm still trying to get my head around how it all works. But in creating these connections, I am sure we are able to find answers for the future. But within this concept of tawa, there is a proverb that goes, people are thought to walk forward into the past and walk backward into the future, both taking place in the present, where the past and the future are constantly mediated in the ever-transforming present. And the second concept is looking at the transfer of Indigenous knowledge, more specifically looking into the Samoan culture and how knowledge is shared, passed down and learned in a traditional Samoan setting in a more modern context. As part of my research, I did an ethnographic study of a Samoan ceremony which takes place during a wedding, which is called whaakingi. This process is where the bride's family gives her over to the groom's family. I found this really interesting because this was the first time I witnessed, this was my first time witnessing a traditional Samoan ceremony that is hardly ever practiced in a modern day setting. But the importance of this came in the form of how it was structured, the language that was used, and the hierarchy within the setting. But most importantly, how the knowledge was being transferred, which I hope is evident in the photos. I compared this method for knowledge transfer to those so many here at the conference have called the European way, which in principle are the tenets established within the Bauhaus first-year teachings. In their first iteration, they were based on holistic ideals of respect and reciprocity. Much of this ideology has been lost to the aesthetic style that we associate with the academy. The next step is to look further into Bauhaus pedagogy and other educational influences on the current models practiced within modern design education. I have looked into this somewhat, but am not yet confident enough to talk about it just yet. But the purpose behind it is not a them or us situation. It's finding something that can supplement, complement, and grow contemporary education models to fit the diversity of students prevalent in our design schools today. Through visual explorations and discoveries via the medium of photography, I will illustrate the cultural composition and inherent Indigenous bedrock from which a more holistic design DNA for New Zealand can be realised. Using Colin McCann's iconic visual statement, "I am," as inspiration, I will reflect on the struggles McCann depicted on his own difficulties with the establishment of identity. These investigations represent a portion of my Masters of Design research around cultural inclusiveness in design pedagogy. So far, I have a series of 3 photographs which explore and depict emotional responses to Indigenous practices, Indigenous knowledge, and Indigenous languages, and an educational environment yet to completely enable them. Through these photographs, I hope to encourage discourse that will nullify the universal approach evident in contemporary understanding of design and remove the mantra of standardization. And I would like to finish off with a quote by the infamous Albert Wendt, an academic, an artist, and a theorist, and a fellow Pasifika. I belong to Oceania, or at least the fertile portion of it, so vast, so fabulously varied, a scatter of islands, nations, cultures, mythologies, and myths, so dazzling a creature, Oceania deserves more than an attempt at mundane fact, only the imagination in free flight, in hope, if not to contain her, to grasp some of her shape, plumage, and pain. Thank you.